But we have to realize, while there's many human resources professionals who have lots of great intentions in mind, are doing great work, like it's still a somewhat controlling, compliance-based profession that is protecting the interests of the organization, which default, if it's not disrupted, is protecting white supremacy culture. It's not the protecting the interests of people. So those systems have to be disrupted.
Hi, friends. Ever wondered how you could turn your big ideas into results? Together, let's reimagine a better sector, tackle systemic issues, and yes, raise some serious cash. Welcome back to The Small Nonprofit, the podcast where your passion meets action. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Small Nonprofit Podcast. I have a really fun guest for you today, Jonathan. I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Jonathan Meagher-Zayas. I am a global educator and nonprofit consultant working with nonprofits all over the continent in providing them educational resources, strategic assessments on how they could advance equity in the organization, and include ways on how they could make their fundraising, communications, and governance more equitable.
How did you get into that?
Yeah, I've always been somewhat entrepreneurial and trying to always be at the forefront of figuring out like how to do things better, how to dismantle power structures that exist. So I've always been conscious of that. I was community organizing a little bit, and then the organization struggled with funding, and then I was like, I should learn fundraising so I don't have to navigate layoffs and other things like that. That's what I thought at 20 years old, and now worked many years full time as various aspects of development communications. I worked on the funder side, worked for a community foundation, and did a lot of diversity work within organizations too. It wasn't until a couple years ago when I was finally getting to a place where I was like, I don't know how much change I can impact within organizations, and I feel more confident and comfortable outside supporting folks who are definitely in it. I ended up consulting, and it was like a way for me to take back autonomy over how I want to see the sector, and how folks who come from strategically under-resourced identities like myself and you really have a chance to set the stage for how we want to envision the sector and actually help organizations get there.
I feel like we got into consulting for very similar reasons then. What kind of changes were you trying to make in-house that you felt weren't moving, and why do you think they weren't moving along?
Yeah, any change I could see that I was like, this is not an equitable practice. This is not even like organizing, utilizing resources too as well, or just centered the comfort and feelings of white, straight, older people in the field. What I really encountered was a lot of performative allyship. Like I saw a lot of people who would claim that they're on board. They're like, oh, I understand. I'm here to support you. Yet there was no tangible action, or a lot of say, just not right now. We got other things to focus on. It wasn't until later in the career where I realized that was a deflection tool to say, oh, we're never going to do it. I'm just telling you, not right now. We had all the skills and resources there. Just people were sitting with the uncomfortable reality that they weren't ready for change. Unfortunately, it was a lot of instances like that too. I also have to bring up quickly, a lot of people, even with privileged identities, don't process their own trauma related to systemic oppression and how that impacts them. And that shows up as well. Not that I wanted to provide therapy or be super trauma conscious or redirect all my efforts just because a person wasn't willing to admit it. However, it was an opportunity where I was like, whoa, they have some things they need to work out on their own. Within my role, the best I could do was offer like, hey, you should explore that or check it out too, or direct them into some wellness resources. But that is a prominent thing that I've seen too, where people are just rooted in like realizing that they're part of these oppressive systems, haven't processed that trauma themselves, or realizing how they're complicit in it, then use tools like deflection or derailing or disengagement to not think about how they can advance the cause.
I feel like a lot of people listening will relate to having the same conversations, being told not right now, just all the deflecting for me rings very true. Being in-house to being a consultant, do you see the same kind of resistance show up, or is it a little bit different because it's a different kind of power dynamic?
I try to avoid working with organizations that are resistant. I just don't have time for you. Even if you pay me money, I try to avoid working with those types of orgs. I find it often I'm working with folks who they realize they need to change, but they're in this fear mindset of doing something wrong, again, like centering their comfort, or even this fear of being canceled, or fear of making a mistake and not knowing what to do next. I see that more often with organizations I'm working with, where I see the genuineness of wanting to change, wanting to do something different, but just not knowing how and afraid of making that mistake. Sometimes it's a lot of supportive coaching. You're going to make mistakes. Here's how you apologize. Here's how you can minimize the harm that you're trying to reduce and cause, and supporting that way. And then tying that with strategic, actionable steps for people to say, hey, here's what you can do next. Here's how you can learn. Here's how you can have this important conversation. Here's actually how you can just relook at your database so it actually is inclusive in a way. I definitely see more folks in that fear zone and then ready to be like, okay, what do I do next? I think one fear is exacerbated oftentimes where people see one or two instances of something really bad happening and they're like, that must happen more often. And you're like, no, it actually doesn't. For example, I'm looking for a lot of clients where they're like, maybe we shouldn't even call it DEI because people are mad about it. And I'm like, are they though? Have you actually sat with people and like actually talked to them about that too? I worked with a client. We had over 250 people fill out a survey. And out of that, like 3 people were mad about DEI. And that's more about then you're having the conversation like, are those 3 people living up to our values and our mission and should be working here rather than actually changing it all just because 3 people are mad? So a lot of it's inflated. A lot of it, they will see an example of someone who was not really canceled, but held accountable. I think people confuse that often too as well. It's like someone did something wrong. They were called out on it. So a lot of information like that too. The last area I will say is the default mode in our society is oppression. So all of us have been just taught oppression. It's ingrained in all our systems. Our default norm is our society, our capitalist society wants complicity. They don't want change and new things and empowered people. So we've been ingrained to fear change of any sort. We're talking about equity work, but just think of any colleague that doesn't want to use the new technology system or doesn't want to change venues because the venue is convenient for them. Think of just like those types of changes too. And then tackle on the dismantling of oppressive systems. There's just a biological and sociological resistance to change that I think leads into some of that fear as well.
I really appreciate the deep dive on fear. I think that definitely shows up in nonprofits. Another thing that shows up that I would love to get your insight on is I don't know exactly how to say it, but basically, like white people policing words that other white people or racialized people use. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, in the community centric fundraising Slack, they were talking about I don't use the term CEO because chief is like cultural appropriation. But after doing my own research, like I went into Reddit where a lot of indigenous people are. And I think it was like the subreddit. I don't exactly remember the name of the subreddit, but where they were talking about this exact thing. This is a
Mm-hmm.
word that they use to describe us. It's not our word. And now they're trying to seem like we would be offended about it when we're not.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen that in a few different situations. Like another one was for Dia de los Muertos, the Carolina, Day of the Dead skull. And this white person told my partner, who's also white, oh, no, she's racist for using her own like Mexican culture. So just
Mm-hmm.
have you seen that kind of stuff? And what is that even called?
It's like performative allyship because while it seems like them trying to help, it's like they've claimed onto something that they're like, oh, I can defend this or I can organize myself around this too. So I can build on that. But then they haven't done the work of centering like what that language actually means or the community that's impacted by that. Basic misinformation, unfortunately, our critical thinking skills as society has gone down a lot too as well. Not even asking the question like where it comes from, why something happens like that too. Just a simple white supremacy practice of just one way is the right way type thing where people are then saying, oh, I learned this and this is the right way, or I've claimed this because I read this somewhere too, and I did my learning, and I can't be questioned, even though they haven't questioned the source, or they haven't done their own deep dive, or they haven't centered the community in their educational efforts too as well. I always recommend organizations to not just look at your education, but look at the diversity of content and diversity of the speakers and the people providing that education too as a key part of taking your organizational learning to the next level to really integrate some of those practices. So a mix of stuff like that too. But I think anything, I also think too, it could be another fear response too of people afraid of they made a mistake once and now they like claimed on something that they could defend easily and then they've buckled down to not go back to that place of they made that mistake in fear again too, so they've just buckled down on it and kind of work is on that way. Fear comes back a lot too as well, and I bring up fear a lot not to say like everyone's afraid or you shouldn't deal with it too, but just like the approach might be different if you know someone's afraid rather than someone's angry to helping at least navigate the conversation for you.
It reminds me of that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, how do you take an organization that, like, we know that we want to do better? What do you do to help them get there?
Yeah, there's a lot of steps that go into it too. I have narrowed down a lot of those steps into kind of four main stages of any type of equity focused work that you can take to as well. So the first stage is usually like assessment. You can't move forward without acknowledging where you are at the moment now. If people are like, I want to move forward and I don't know, I usually recommend an assessment of both internal purposes, interpersonal relationships, organizational systems, and ideologies that impact too. So assessment, and then before even moving forward, once you've done the assessment, the acknowledgement of what is learned in that assessment is important because while you have just uncovered a bunch of things and you want to address it too, you have to then again process any harm that has come on and heal from that harm, any personal feelings of trauma that have come up from that too, or personal realizations that you were complicit in oppression. You have to acknowledge and own that and then focus on how you're going to eliminate some of that too. So go to that acknowledge stage, then dive into like learning how to do better, how you can explore ways, even strengthen your skills, and then think about, oh, I'm ready to now do some action planning related to it too, and think about some strategic change management strategies on how you actually take your organization to a different level too as well. And I say change management for a reason because engagement is crucial in all of this too. We keep saying community centered, yeah, two or three people will make the decision to build on that, and that's not community centered. That is and still dominated in certain aspects where any aspect that you're trying to make this anti-racist, equitable, decolonized change in your organization, whatever people are using to call it to build on in that way, you need buy-in and support and a community focus throughout the whole process too. So when you're ready for that change, ready, intentional about how you're having a community-centered change management mindset.
In a past conversation, we talked about outcomes focused equity work. I wonder if you could define that for the audience.
Yeah, as so many like when we think about like grants or new initiatives too, we sometimes always think about like the end goal, like what's the impact going to be. And so many times in nonprofits, I'm working with them, people again have that commitment or know better, but they can't envision the change that they want to actually happen too. So focusing on outcomes at least helps them get to a point of why they're along this journey because people are going to feel uncomfortable or you're going to have to learn new things or build on that too, and that's easier to navigate some of those challenges when you know something better is along the way. So always focusing on what that outcomes looks like too and what that could be, and defining what those necessarily could be are different for each avenue. If you look at diversity, it might be more representation in your leadership on your board or even in your donor database. If it's inclusion, it's better behaviors that people are exhibiting to build better relationships and connected in that way. If it's equity, it's more opportunity. That could be leadership development pipelines or increasing access and pay equity opportunities. If it's access, it's removing barriers to engagement too. So defining that just helps you again think of that like vision of where we're going. Like our nonprofit organizations, we have visions of better futures, and we should be thinking about that vision too when we're thinking about anti-racism work because it's focusing on the better what's going to be leading that way too as well, instead of if we just think, oh, we got to do this because it's a good popular thing to do, we've experienced discomfort or we have a lack of resources, we're going to dissuade from it because we haven't thought about the end goal and we haven't really intentionally thought about the change we're trying to make.
From my perspective, I've often felt that programs people are more in line with equity inclusion than, for example, the fundraisers and the board. I wonder if that's been your perspective too, and if that's where you're spending most of your time working out.
It's interesting you say that because as someone who has studied in the social work space and human services and programs, studied in the organizational management space with public administration, and then dealt with fundraisers who are often in more communications type of space too as well, and also dealing with volunteers that would be the board. I think of the academic disciplines that people have been approached to as well, like programs like a lot of people get into program work because they want to make the change and they see the change and they're more connected to the issues that the organization experience. So oftentimes they see it more often than some of the other spaces of what that, because their primary audience is that too as well. And I think too, like I teach in a school of social work for graduate students, all my students are seeing daily the struggles that the people that they're facing too as well, so they acknowledge it, they're more intentional about it because they see it all the time too as well. At least on the management side of things, people are aware, but like they're disciplines aren't intentionally incorporating that, and that's where the disciplines we need to disrupt, because the accounting teams, the HR teams, the IT teams, the quality assurance teams aren't thinking about how oppression exists in their spaces. So they're just saying it's important, but they're leaving it to other people, and they have to realize and sit with that too when they're connecting that way. So I think there's some grace where there's, they haven't learned that, but at the same time they need to be held accountable of how that integrates more, because when we think about equity work, we don't think about how is this system going to be more equitable. Sometimes we focus on the program work because that's connected to our mission, where we have to disrupt some of those methods too. And then last, with the board, we have to realize the concept of a volunteer board to lead organizations is already a dysfunctional hot mess to begin with, that we just have to admit. Like, we were set up for failure to give people who don't interact with the organizations the most authority. Again, in theory, to represent community interests, that makes sense, but it never is in practice too. So, most of those folks are not in any space learning about anti-racism work, especially if they come from the private sector and even the government sector too. People aren't learning some of these key concepts that we are, and then they come and we expect them to learn and also show up for meetings and donate and do all this. It's an unrealistic expectation sometimes. For board engagement, it is educating them, but in a way that they have the capacity for, given their roles, and help them make better decision making. But often organizations default to human resources to deal with people. So they put this work in there, but we have to realize, while there's many human resources professionals who have lots of great intentions in mind, are doing great work, like it's still a somewhat controlling, compliance-based profession that is protecting the interests of the organization, which default, if it's not disrupted, is protecting white supremacy culture. It's not the protecting the interests of people. So those systems have to be disrupted.
Okay, so I want to ask you a twofold question.
Okay.
For the organizations that fail at this, that don't do well, I want to know what they have in common. And for the organizations that do this really well and succeed and like actually achieve their outcomes, focus equity
Yeah.
work, what do they have in common?
I'll start with the ones that don't succeed, because then that can lead into that. So the ones that don't succeed, there's no defined goals. It's a moment for them, not a movement. Like they just think it's popular, we're doing that. So there's no goals to actually what their intention to. There's no buy-in to actually do any of the work too. They haven't been intentional about how they have buy-in, so they're facing resistance and making it harder. There's no intentional focus on skills, on people. As we know with nonprofits, a lot of people say, oh, passion is the first step for it. But yeah, you also have to be good at aspects and roles and do that too. Like I can be super passionate about something, but doesn't mean I'm good at it too. So we need skill development, actually building on what that looks like too as well. We need resources and investments too to actually build on it. So organizations that failed to actually invest what they should have or what they thought they should have in that too. And then a plan of actually what they're doing that lays out the change they want to see and how they're going to get there. All of those components really think about how they fail at these complex change initiatives, where the organizations that do set at least a vision for where they want to be and then invest in it to empower people, have conversations, attempt to get buy-in, attempt to build inclusive relationships too, and build on that. And also have what they say as like a growth, open-minded perspective on the work too as well. They aren't going in saying, if this change didn't happen, then we're giving up. they're saying like, this is what we think we could change, but we know we're on a journey and we might discover things that aren't. They're more open to different perspectives of what that journey looks like too as well. I'm working with an organization that literally said the same thing. They're like, we ideally want a better, stronger, more diverse culture, but we also don't know what we don't know. So how can we integrate that focus, but also learn along the journey a way to realize what that is, and then strategically plan, invest, empower people, and get buy-in along that process to get there.
One of my big beliefs as a consultant is to empower nonprofits to be able to succeed without me there. So,
Mhm.
do nonprofits need an external consultant to get started on their DEI work? What does that look like without that additional support?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't want to ever be working with a place forever, because like then I'm not succeeding. If my intention is like building that goal and building that capacity too, I think it goes to a sense too of taking assessment of the capacity and skills that you have internally and seeing what, and maybe you can reorganize or empower people and build on what that could look like too as well specifically. So I think it could be done. I think if there's some intentionality, and then you can't advance any work without any type of professional helping in, because a professional then helps with the mindset, and that professional can be in-house too. Like I believe if a type of professional comes in and they're supported, given authority and autonomy over their work, they can build on that. So the work can definitely be done in-house too as well. Where I come in is one, to educate where they don't have that knowledge or skill set within house too. Two is capacity. Like we build capacity. So like they might have it too, but they don't have the time. They're dealing with staffing issues and they're navigating what that could be. So that's why they bring someone else along in that way. Or it's to bring in specific perspectives that again they don't have in-house, to add to other lived experiences of what it could be. I'm working with a lot of organizations in like rural New York that see a little less racial diversity mix up too. It's still there, but they're really struggling and challenging with LGBTQ inclusion, because those folks are there. They're there, they're part of their communities, and they just aren't exposed to a lot of the types of prominent events and stuff like that that are in more urban areas. So a lot of them are more intentional about recruiting for that representation because that's key for them at the moment. That's not an end all be all. It's part of strategy, but I think it more is. I think people should take stock in like the skills and experiences that people have within house too, and then really identify potential gaps where they might need to bring in someone along or hire someone, or where it could be too as well. The last quick caveat I'll say about internal work too is not just like saying, oh, we could do this in house too, but also doing it in house where you are redistributing or paying people for said work too as well. I've seen a lot of people say, hey, we're going to do a DI committee. It's great. And then the DI committee is like on top of that job, and that those people haven't been paid more for it, or their work hasn't been redistributed so they can have easel time to engage in the work effectively. So if you are going to do it internally, then you have to look at, say, hey, that's going to take 10% of their job. We can either add more compensation to add onto it too, or redirect some of their role for that too. I think organizations, if you're intentional about that, you have to be conscious of your workload, capacity, growth, and what that looks like too internally.
For organizations that are very inspired by this episode, what do you think are some quick things that they can do to start identifying barriers, setting realistic goals, and like taking those next steps?
Yeah, be community minded. Like talk to as many people in your organization as possible about what they think is going wrong, what they think barriers are, or what their perceptions are as well. Whatever language you feel comfortable using at your organization, I would start off with that. But just having a conversation, be like, okay, we're considering advancing more diversity, equity, inclusion work too. What do you think of it? How would you define it? What does success look like for you? Engaging as much other people too, because one, you can quash a lot of resistance just from that conversation, where you could say, hey, we know you don't get paid that well, so we're trying to advocate to the state to better pay you, but we want your opinion and perspectives there. And people are like, oh, that's what this means? Yeah, of course I'm a part of it too, because I recognize the challenge. Or, oh, we want to better make people feel like they belong in the organization. As many conversations with people, with teams, with direct people, with people you serve, building on that too. And then it could stem into identifying themes of what you can then address and set some goals to be based on there too. Definitely talk to people. If you need a formal assessment, think of a survey or a tool to get perspectives that way, but and build on that and then help guide that to where that could be. Definitely, I think it's any type of way to assess what's going on to really understand how people feel about these issues or where are their barriers to will then help you identify and then strategically think about investing in not just financial resource but people talent too in these areas to build on that.
So good. Okay, for people who want to learn more about what you do or want to continue the conversation, where can they find you?
Yeah, primarily I connect a lot on LinkedIn, so I know my LinkedIn profile will be on there too as well. You can also follow my consulting business on Instagram at Equity Warrior Strategies. And then if you want to focus, be intentional about equity work and kind of build on that too, you can contact me through my website, equitywarriorstrategies.com. And if you want to really think about this in regard to your fundraising, board governance, capacity building, communications, to explore the great work my colleagues and I are doing at Cause Effective, so causeeffective.org, because we're really centering the lived experiences of fundraisers of color and helping transform organizations to better be intentional about that. So you can work with me and my colleagues through that too as well.
Thank you so much for coming here. I always love learning from you and just like hearing everything that you're doing. It's so great.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm grateful for this space too. And just conversations like this are healing for me to talk with people like you, to re energize and be like, oh, we're smart and we got this and we could change these systems too as well. Let's avoid all the bull that people put in our face and actually focus on the intentionality. So thank you for having me. I'm really grateful for this.
I think that's one of the main things I like about the podcast is like being able to have these conversations because I don't know, there's not that many spaces where you can, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah. But thank you again. And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the Small Nonprofit Podcast. I hope that you start looking at who's responsible for DEI efforts at your organization, what you can actually do to move those forward. Until next time, bye for now. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Small Nonprofit. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with our guests directly or find me on LinkedIn. Let's keep moving money to mission and prioritizing our well-being. Bye for now.